Kia ora koutou katoa. Good evening. I am David Faulkner, the General Manager of Property Management for Property Brokers, and welcome to our first webinar, our first discussion for 2023 with our professor, professor at Lincoln University now. He used to be Massey University, and we'll just put him onto the screen. And here is Professor Graham Squires. And Graham, welcome. And just checking.
Thanks, David. Okay? Yeah, I can hear you perfectly. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks
Wonderful.
For joining us on our first discussion of the year, which we're going to be going on to Tenancy Tribunal, and we'll be giving the ability to share some of the data and the research what Professor Squires has done with us. He works with us as a consultant from his company called The Property Knowledge. And Graham, there's been some changes in your life. You're no longer in Palmerston North. You're now a resident of the Garden City in Christchurch. What's sent you down to Christchurch, Graham?
Yeah, sorry about that, folks. I've defected to the mainland. Yeah, so I've exchanged a professor of property studies at Massey to a professor of property studies at Lincoln University, just outside Christchurch. So yeah, a nice move. I'm director of what's known as the Bachelor of Land and Property Management, and it's we're getting close to 100 students coming through on our first year. Lots of good face-to-face teaching, teaching on property management module, a property development module, and our Property 101 module, which I'm leading. So yeah, sort of new, exciting times, new horizons, but yeah, certainly not left palmy. I'm still coming backwards and forwards, and enjoying New Zealand life. I think that was non-negotiable in my family, that we were going to stick with New Zealand. So it's yeah, it's nice to see new things, but keep my Kiwi roots grounded.
Well, when I saw the beard, Graham, I actually thought that you were considering becoming the Wizard of Christchurch. The way how your beard's coming along there, it's very, very impressive. And how are you finding Lincoln University at the moment?
Good, yeah, friendly bunch. Really enjoying it. A lot of good face-to-face teaching, which is one of the sort of the draws, as well as the program, the 4-year program. So it's just nice to be around good, friendly staff, good, friendly students. Not to be disparaging of my old colleagues, you know, we're still keeping up the contacts and keeping those networks. You know, property is a small world, as you know, and yep. Property academia is even smaller. So, so it's just strengthening our networks. You know, there's certainly connections that are maintained with Massey University and with Auckland University, colleagues up there. We're a small bunch, but we still like getting our heads in the books and into the research. And for me, it's just yeah, from a different institution, which is nice. So yeah,
so before we dive into the research, Graham, can I just ask you, you've moved from Palmerston North to Christchurch. How you find the comparative in prices in terms of real estate and in rents? Have you from being, you know, because you've obviously moved down there, you're renting and presuming to start with. How have you found the market down there?
Yeah, I mean, our journey sort of we've ended up renting our place in Palmerston North through property brokers of all people. Don't mind disclosing that. And we're renting down in Christchurch, and it's generally a like-for-like market is what we found. I mean, from the analysis that we've done over the last year, you can see that you do get quite a lot more bang for your buck down in Christchurch. I think I recall you saying if you were starting again in New Zealand, Christchurch would be the place you'd go. And we're finding that, you know, it's sort of on a par with Palmerston North. I think in terms of the downturn of the market, in terms of buying places, I think Christchurch is only sort of waking up to that reality of a fall in the market. You're starting to see a lot more stock staying on the market a little bit longer, and things not selling in auction as long as staying. Yeah, not when they go to auction, not selling as quickly. So that you're sort of starting to see that sort of trail off. But as we've seen in the data, it's been a bit of a flat line in Christchurch, and that's still contained. It still maintains that sort of constant. And I see that in the rental market as well. And, you know, so there is a lot more competition for rental. I'm sure you guys at Property Brokers have picked that up. You know, there is a lot of demand there. But the market on the whole, on the purchasing side of things, there's a lot of demand and there's a lot of supply. So that tends to equalize things out, and why that Christchurch market does stay on a constant. Earthquakes aside, 10 years on from that, things are changing, and certainly in the geography, there's a lot more willingness to be back in Christchurch rather than the sort of the exodus to Rolleston and that we experienced 5 years ago. But that still is maintained. And on the rental side of things, there is a lot of demand and not enough supply, I would argue, on that sort of market. You may see that.
We're seeing that nationwide. We're seeing that nationwide. Anyway, on to tonight's topic, and what we've decided to do, we've gone off what we've traditionally done is looked at what's happening with some of you regularly follow. You know that Graham's been working with us now for about 12 months, and we do a quarterly regional rental report where we typically look at what's happening with rents, comparing different cities compared to different provinces. But we've decided to do something a little bit different for our first one of 2023. And Graham, you want to explain what you've been up to and the research that what you've done?
Yeah, I thought what I'd do is just share my screen, and then you can get a good feel for where we are with this report. Can you see that on the screen, David? I'm not sure
if our viewers can see. If you can, Graham, please.
If I just do that up there, how's that?
Yeah, and then you can. Yeah, I think we can all see that quite clearly. So what Graham's been working on, and I've done a bit of a commentary on it as well. But Graham's basically worked off. Graham, you explain what you've done.
Yeah, I'll talk you through. Yeah, I think tenancy services data. Obviously, that's been starting to build up over the last couple of years, and I think between both of us, we knew that we would be able to sort of develop some good time series data from that and try and work out what's happening. So essentially, what we've done is we've downloaded all that data and put it into a time series since 2020 to get a feel for the sort of some of the applications, as you can see here in terms of the contents of what this report is. Some are the applications, and for those that are not familiar with this data, there's the disputes. So you might have multiple disputes in applications, so you tend to get just slightly more data points on the disputes rather than the applications that are put forward. So the sort of the unique sort of bit of data manipulation here is putting it into a time series, which is making it really interesting to see what's happening. There might be certain punctuations in time, like healthy homes, for instance. This time series all starts, largely from when COVID hit, March 2020. So it's nice to see the sort of the flow through effects. So what we're seeing here then, sort of in breaking down the data, is these two halves, is the applications and the disputes. And we're seeing it essentially from either a landlord side, a tenant side, or they're jumbled together. And that's the way that tenancy services have sort of presented the data. And we're sort of reinterpreting what's happening. We'll talk about the whys in a second, David, and you can sort of maybe sort of mark some pointers of the what's the data. I mean, it's always what's the data saying, what the facts, and then it's us just try and interpret what's happening and make some opinion and thoughts on why. Yeah, the big why question. But in terms of what we've seen in the data is this is on the applications side of things. We see sort of the COVID 2020, a big sort of fall, and then we sort of often see this sort of cyclical pattern. So this is landlord applications to the Tenancy Tribunal, essentially, is what we're looking at. We've seen that sort of cyclical response. And then from the tenant side of things, again, it's sort of cyclical. We get that COVID outbreak, there's a bit of a spike, and then we're sort of seeing a general fall, but with a slight uptick here. So we're sort of arguing here that there's a slight fall in applications from tenants relative to what we've seen in landlords. Now, this is tenant and landlord applications, so we can see a relative difference. So you can always sort of look at this data in terms of, well, how are these greys changing relative to the reds? The reds being the landlord applications, the greys being the tenant applications. And this is quite an interesting, for those that are not familiar with this sort of data, it's quite interesting in itself that you got a lot of landlords, a great amount of landlords going to tenancy tribunals rather than tenants. More landlords than tenants. And we're sort of making that there's not a significant relative change over time. We see that fall post-COVID. Obviously, Tenancy Tribunal are not going to be processing as much information, those sorts of things. But as a relative, landlord to tenant, we're not seeing a real shift. Again, that cyclical cycle that is the cumulative value of what we've just seen.
Can I just go back to that one, please, Graham?
Sure.
Yeah. So what we can see here, and this is tenancy services, if they only started doing this from 2020, it would have been great to have gone back further, because I tell you what, I would have loved to have counted how many methamphetamine applications had gone through the Tenancy Tribunal. Tenancy services only started doing this from 2020. What you can see in quarter one, for 2020, that is basically just before the first lockdown, isn't it? And then we have the lockdown towards the end of March, and then you see this huge drop in the applications, particularly by the landlords. And then you've got the lockdown, and then the lockdown ends. We haven't really seen it increase significant yet. We're starting to. Yeah. Anyway, there you go.
That makes sense. No, yeah, and then in sort of the other part of this is geography. We're always interested in the geography because a lot of these can be tracked by where the tribunal was taking place. So here we've got the in blue Auckland, in orange the Christchurch, grey Hamilton, yellow Wellington, and then in green other. And I think what we sort of pick out from here, the sort of the interesting aspects is that we're seeing Auckland as a slight increase. So you're talking 40%, moving up to say 45%. Whereas the Christchurch applications sort of decrease slightly. So there's a sort of trade-off there in terms of regions, So Auckland, as you'd expect, sort of, has the vast majority of districts in tribunal. But that's increased. So I suppose that's a sort of an interesting talking point for us that we can cover in a minute. In terms of the actual disputes, so they were all application stuff, and these are sort of more disputes that we're starting to crunch, and this is an amalgamation of both landlord and tenant. So this is together of what's top, and they put them in like top percentages. For this particular graph, we're sort of seeing rent arrears just as a highlighting reason for going to dispute, and that's the highest category of landlord dispute. So this sort of brownish sort of colour here is it's top of the shop in terms of reasons. Yes, so David.
That's an increase, Graham, by the looks of things here. Could that be? I mean, is this pressure as cost of landlords?
There's a breakup on our service there, David. I'm not sure if it's my end or your end. Did you want to just reformulate the question? It's clearing up now.
Yeah. So I can see the rent arrears disputes that are starting to increase. Have you got any information on why that might be?
Again, yeah, it's difficult. So this is rent arrears and why rent. I sense in your question is, well, why is rent arrears starting to increase since 2020? Yeah, that's obviously things. All eyes are going to go to things like cost of living. So there's going to be pressure on tenants to pay rent. Essentially, I think that's probably a logical explanation of that. Is that some line of thinking that you would see from the sharp end?
Yeah, I'm breaking up a little bit as well. Somebody's just made a comment on that, so hopefully you can hear me clearly. But yeah, what surprises me on this, Graham, is that in quarter one in 2020, the silence of rent arrears applications. Naturally, you see it drop as we come into the first lockdown, and that's when they extended the 60 days through from when it used to be 21 days for rent arrears in the tribunal. They extended it to 60 days, so you would have seen a big drop in tribunal applications for rent arrears naturally. Yeah. But I was expecting to see it increase once the lockdowns had ended, and it didn't. It's only No. Oh, it's cut out completely.
I know. Yeah, what should we do? I mean, I've gone back. I'm just here on that link, and it's going through. It might be recording. Hello, listeners, if you are. I'm gonna. Yeah, what should we do?
Let me just see if we can join again.
If not, we can rerun the webinar another time. Maybe that might be the best way to do this. I'll turn off my phone and I'll just hang on this link. Okay, I can see you coming through. Hey, Dave. I can see you fine. Can you see me and hear me, David?
Mute.
Yeah,
right. I can hear you. I can
hear you and see. Oh, right. Whereas I can see and hear you perfectly. Yeah. I can leave and go back in. I'll just give it. Should I do that?
Oh God, we've probably lost the people now, haven't we? Quite a few people have joined into this. What a bugger.
You can hear me. Have you got your speakers on?
Now I can see you. Now I can see you. So there's people there. Okay, they can. So yeah, I'm getting told they can hear us.
Hello.
So great. We'll continue because I'm sure that our marketing team can edit this and they can merge these two because there'll be two videos now. Do you want to bring your screen up and go back to where you were?
Let's do this. All right. I think we're Dave, you were mid-flow on. Well, where I started out was talking about these, the breakdown of, well, there was applications. And now we're looking at actual disputes. And this was the joining together of landlords and tenants. And I think you were starting to pick up on that rent arrears question. Because if you look at landlords and the top percentage of disputes, we're often looking at termination and possession. But I think what you were trying to sort of dig out was this rent arrears, which is sort of top of the shop. And you're seeing this trend here. That you see the fall off here post-COVID, and then starting to a gradual. I mean, there is a dip, but you know, we're going from what 2,200 to 3,300 since that sort of initial spike, and we're asking why. And I think you were saying that some of this is the fall is that because of applications and the freezing in that regard. Was there a bit more to that you're gonna add on the why?
Yeah, well, I mean, my view. I mean, first of all, we haven't seen the figures coming close to the 5,000 that we saw in Q1 of 2020, but we are starting to see that slight increase now from when we had the first lockdown. What surprised me at first, Graham, was the fact that we didn't see an increase going back up to those high rates post the first lockdown, which we thought we may have done. So it showed that I don't know if landlord-tenant relationships, they learned to work with each other better, and they maybe those relationships got better. But we're now starting to see again that increase of rent arrear applications heading north. My view could, and it's just an opinion, and I could be wrong, is that we've added pressures going on to landlords in terms of healthy homes, interest rates going up, interest deductibility being removed. So you're not getting the same tax benefits as what you previously had. Landlords are trying to recover that in higher rents, and we've certainly seen it in provincial New Zealand. In some cases, rents going up 15%, even more per annum.
Yeah, yeah.
And
it was the
and so obviously that means that the tenants are going to have, it's going to be harder on tenants, and some tenants may start to default in rent, particularly if you start to see unemployment rise. So we're in a precarious time at the moment, and that's why I think we're starting to see a steady increase.
I had a question for you here in terms of this termination and possession. You know, that's risen. You see this grey line, and it's sort of gone above other categories here. You know, this started to become the second highest in terms of landlord reasons for dispute. And this termination possession is, so is that where the relationship's just fallen down, not because of financial reasons, you know, rent arrears. There's other reasons why the landlord wants to terminate the contract. Is that,
there will be,
is that fair?
Yeah, I think the bulk of those will be rent arrears, Graham, first of all.
Yeah.
But I think what you'll see is additional things, maybe since antisocial behaviour. Things to take into consideration here, Graham, is that, you know, remember 2020 where we saw the amendments to the Residential Tenancies Act, where if you had a problematic tenant, you'd just give 90 days notice and the tenancy will end. Well, now it's not so easy. And you may have to file to the Tenancy Tribunal under some of these antisocial laws that have been implemented, and that may be one of those reasons there.
All right. And then on the tenant side of things as well. So this, when we break it down, you know, on both sides, I know there's a lot more nuance to these sorts of conversations, which we'll talk about in a second. But on the tenant side, it's interesting that we're sort of seeing largely refunds of bonds are the highest categories in reasoning for going to tribunal on the tenant side of things, and damages as well. And we'll talk about healthy homes as well. So if we just show the numbers, you know, in terms of you know, this orange figure here is that compensation damages reasoning. So I would imagine, so this is the tenant going to tribunal and saying, is it some of the damaging to their own property of the tenant's property?
No, what I think this is saying is that they're seeking damages from the landlord. So compensation damages, they're looking for exemplary damages. So that's when a landlord who's breached the Residential Tenancies Act. An obvious example of that will be failing to maintain the property. So if a tenant's been asking for landlords to do repairs, that basically the landlord has to get it fixed. What has surprised me a little bit is that once we saw again the amendments to the RTA where tenants could have name suppression if they applied to the Tenancy Tribunal. So the fear from tenants was where they could get blacklisted. And we haven't, and I thought we would have seen an increase of tenancy applications to the tribunal, where it hasn't really changed. It's been around that 1,000 applications per quarter. Though we can see from here, Graham, there's certainly an increase. Healthy homes is starting to you know, come to fore. We may see more of that coming into winter as it gets colder, but that's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah, because you see that sort of refund of bond, that grey figure, and then, you know, healthy homes is this sort of dark blue, you know, and that's where we're sort of tracking it from the data from 2020, starting to sort of build here, build, you know, and that's going to start to, you know, almost get close to refund of bond, which would be an obvious sort of reason for a tenant going to tribunal. But it's interesting that that sort of healthy homes sort of reasoning on the tenant side of things is starting to sort of take prominence. So yeah, that's hopefully we can just sort of I think that's a really good way to sort of see this timeline of change, isn't it, in this data, rather than just sort of looking at landlord tenant, you know, and being quite blunt about what's happening. So if I just stop presenting, and I think it's for us to sort of think through the why a little bit more, isn't it? I think some of our conversations that we have is about, well, where should this go in terms of renting and security for on the tenant side of things. And I think one of the interesting sort of points that came up in, well, where are we heading to, was an idea around rental warrant of fitness. You know, so there's a clearer line of understanding. I mean, these tribunal figures that we're looking at, you know, they're quite blocky and very sort of chunky in terms of what everything's being boiled down to. But a lot of our arguments and our discussions that we have is a lot more nuanced, and it'd be nice to see ways in which we can deal with those nuances. It's not just because a place wasn't by the letter of the law healthy homes compliant, there's other aspects that need to be put into play here. Hence that conversation: is it just about someone not paying their rent, or is it a little bit more about antisocial behaviour? And there's lots of sort of aspects of where this data can make us think about where we want to go to. And ultimately, this conversation about a rental warrant of fitness was something that we've toyed around with in conversations that we've had over the last year. So I suppose my question to you would be, a rental warrant of fitness, is that something that would just be muted in the sort of the property community?
Well, first of all, Graham, if you put your camera on, because we can't see it at the moment. I mean,
that's a shame. It is on.
Is it? Oh, it's not coming up. I can't see it anyway. You're a good looking man, but
I'll turn off and turn on, and that might work. It.
Okay, so this is my. There you go. We can see you now. So this is. I can see it. Other people can see it. I can see you now. Anyway, this is my opinion on this. Now, I was at the Real Estate Institute conference for property management last Thursday, and Chloe Swarbrick was on a political panel, and I found myself actually agreeing with Chloe Swarbrick in terms of what she was saying was that the healthy homes hasn't worked because we've still got people living in cold, drafty properties. There's people who, how qualified are they to go and do the assessments? It's complicated. I mean, when I started in the industry, the tenancy agreement was 2 pages long. Now it's, if you're going off the tenancy services tenancy agreement, it's about 23 to 27 pages. And I mean, how complicated do we have to make this? And she said we should scrap healthy homes and work towards a rental warrant of fitness. I found myself agreeing. In Europe, they have what's called energy performance certifications. I like that concept. So I think that because there's so much confusion around healthy homes, and people are scratching their heads and does it comply? Doesn't it comply? Sometimes it's open to interpretation. And I think part of the issue is that we're seeing tenants are probably believe that the property doesn't comply. The landlord may think it does, and the tenants are applying under those grounds. So that's partly one of my theories. We've made it overcomplicated. Don't get me wrong. I think we need to have minimum standards on housing. Absolutely. Healthy homes. If we had our time again, I wouldn't have proceeded with it. I would have looked at an alternative model, maybe around an EPC or rental warrant of fitness, whatever we want to call it. I think Chloe Swarbrick is onto something there.
Yeah. And it's something that goes with the sort of professionalization of the industry and how professional property managers fit into the picture here. We look at this diagram, we look at the graphs, we just see that bipolar type conversation about tenant and landlord. And I suppose one thing that creates even more nuance to this is how property managers are placed in these conversations. So I suppose it's a question for yourself, David, at more of the coalface in terms of practice. In these tenancy tribunals, are property managers sort of drawn in to talk on behalf of the tenant? Are they drawn in to talk on behalf of the landlord? It'd be interesting because they have to be, to my mind, independent. But, it's interesting to see how that fits into this.
No, this is how it works. Is because when we sign a contract with the landlord, we actually become the landlord. So we're the agent for the landlord, and in the eyes of the tenancy tribunal, we become the landlord. Now, this in itself carries risk for property management companies.
Yeah,
because the tribunal can make and will make orders against a tenancy, against the property management company. And then it's up to the property management company. If they've been negligent, then they should pay the penalty if there is a penalty to pay. But if it's an owner who is dragging the chain on maintenance, why should the property management company end up being penalised when what they're trying to do is educate the landlord in regards to their responsibilities to, their responsibilities in terms of the Residential Tenancies Act. Interestingly, Graham, I've just quickly tallied up how many applications to the tribunal there are a year. And, in 2020, there was 22,000. In 2021, there was 18,786. And in 2022, that had gone up to 24,464. So you're starting to see a gradual increase going back to you know, the pre-COVID levels. What percentage of that is in relation to the amount of tenancies that are in New Zealand? So roughly, approximately, there's about 600,000 tenancies in New Zealand, if you believe the data provided by the state. So the average length of a tenancy now we're finding is round about 3 years. So if I tally up all the applications, so we've seen 61,000 applications. You've got if you're going off the complete data based on number of tenancies, length of a tenancy, number of applications to the Tenancy Tribunal, you have a 1 in 10 chance of ending up in the tribunal with a tenancy based on, and that's very rough. So, you know, you've got to make sure. Look, I like the Tenancy Tribunal in terms of it's great to have an independent place where tenants and landlords can resolve disputes. Not every country has that. Does Tenancy Tribunal work in its current format? I think there's improvements where it can work.
Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting to see the sort of as the professionalising of the industry sort of moves forward, what proportion of different property management firms are successful or unsuccessful, manage things well, you know. And I think that's going to be, you know, is there going to be a league table of property managers that are successful, you know? So there's those sorts of considerations of where, you know, there's going to be more and more people letting out properties and using professional property management firms. So I think there's going to be an interest in terms of, you know, who's going to be better representing you if things do get legal.
Well, things that landlords have to consider as well. It's not just the tenants who can take the landlord to the Tenancy Tribunal. Tenancy Services has a division, or the state has a division called Tenancy Compliance and Investigation Team. Now, they have the ability to take landlords on behalf of a tenant if there's been severe breaches or alleged severe breaches of the RTA. Tenancy Services or the Tenancy Compliance has that ability to act on behalf of the tenants, and we've seen that on a handful of occasions. Not a lot, and the amount of money that's probably spent on the Tenancy Compliance, taxpayers' money, which is spent on the Tenancy Compliance and Investigation Team. I mean, I don't know. I'm on the fence as to whether the taxpayer is getting good value for money in terms of how Tenancy Compliance works, because it feels at times, being in this industry, that the property management companies can be targeted because we're easy. There's a lot of landlords out there who manage their own investments, and I don't think that all of them, they may be well intentioned, but they don't have that knowledge, expertise, and I don't think some of them do it as well as what they should. And they're probably the tenants that need protecting more. Yeah. And as our industry heads toward regulation, you know, you're going to see more and more professional property management, the standard of it improve. And you'll also see more property management companies refusing to take on particular properties because of the risk to them in being able to trade. What we may see, what I would like to see, is a registration of landlords. You know, something similar. We see similarities in Ireland, Wales. They do similar things with that. And I mean, look, it's all about protecting the rights of both parties. We choose to be landlords. You know, if you're a landlord, you make that choice. Tenants don't have that luxury. You know, some tenants do choose to be tenants. And I do, you know, I do think tenants need that protection.
Yeah, indeed. And I suppose one other thing, I suppose that a lot of people listening in and listening back to this will, I often hear stories of, you know, how the tribunal process is handled and different regions, because I want to sort of like look down into the data and sort of see how different regions perform and how different adjudicators, judges type perform in terms of this. It's I can say this as an academic and apolitical and all the rest of it, and just sort of as a concerned citizen as well. You know, is there a little bit of, depends which way the wind's blowing in terms of decisions? You know, what's your experience of that? I know you've been sort of to a few of these. Is it?
I feel a bit nervous being on camera and knowing this is going to be recorded, because it may come back and bite you on the backside sometimes. But I do feel that there is big improvements that can be made within the Tenancy Tribunal. Sometimes you do see inconsistencies around the country. Different adjudicators will interpret things differently. It is part of the judiciary. And sometimes what you will see is with the tribunal, it's not bound, they're not judges who are making the decisions. When a judge makes a decision in a court, it sets precedents, and you have to follow. That kind of creates law. Tenancy Tribunal, it's open to the interpretation of the adjudicator. Now, if there's been an appeal over a particular case in tenancy law and a judge makes a ruling, those adjudicators have to follow that lead. And there's a very famous case, Gow versus Cork, which is referred to by a district court, which looks at accidental damage and intentional damage. And you see it referred to in a lot of tenancy tribunal cases. But yes, in there is an inconsistency, which I would love to see improve. I would also, personally, I would remove rent arrears applications from the tenancy tribunal, because it's a disputes tribunal. Now, if it's rent arrears only, and you've got solid evidence that shows that a tenant gets, let's say, 4 weeks in arrears, a landlord should be able to get automatic possession of the property. And that also, it will stop a tenant going further and further in debt as well, and that could speed up the whole. Because if you're waiting 6, 7, 8 weeks to get a tribunal hearing, look, it can become rather problematic, rather time consuming. It's frustrating for all parties. The debt can grow and grow and grow. A landlord's still got a mortgage to pay. So I'd love to, and you would be able to reduce probably by half the amount of time it takes to get to tribunal if you remove rent arrears applications only, and just that was dealt with in a different format rather than taking up the court's time.
That's good. I don't think you said anything too controversial there. I think it'll hold up in court. The question sometimes that comes my way is, is it in favour of the tenant? Is that is it? Yeah. How does it not? I suppose the question is the decision have to be sort of?
You said it in the first sentence. Does it has been the tenant. Does it favour the tenant? Yes, it does. And it's because it's not called the Residential Landlords Act, it's called the Residential Tenancies Act. And I actually don't have a problem with tribunal being there, giving greater protection to a tenant. A landlord should know all the responsibilities. They should know the law in terms of dealing with a residential tenancy. Should the tenant know all the laws? As I say, they may not have chosen to be a tenant. So I do believe that they do need greater protection. And I do believe sometimes, but sometimes you do tend to see a biased, maybe in some cases. But
I think it'd be good to crunch that data a bit more, isn't it, to sort of see the type of case. I think the value of what's being on the table here in terms of the amount that's being claimed. If someone's been in arrears for many, many months, or if the malicious damage, for instance, is very, very high, or I think because when things go to court and if the stakes are higher, I think the decisions might be shifting different ways, and that might sort of come into it as well. So maybe sort of developing some of the data and understanding around how much is being disputed, I think is part of this.
And I think what you said before, based it on adjudicators as well, and geographical locations. I mean, there's so much data that we deal with in this industry. And, with 20-odd thousand tenancy tribunal applications or every year, I mean, there'd be some really good information that you could drill into, which you'll be able to provide better education to tenants, better education to landlords, better education to the adjudicators that listen to the hearings, so they can compare. And wouldn't it be great to have a league table of adjudicators and see who's awarding what? I mean, And it would provide greater consistency. It would provide also. I believe it will provide greater consistency.
Yeah, well, as a researcher, I'm there about being objective, and I think that's what everyone wants to see, don't they? Sort of, what's reason, what's logic, what's objective, and I think taking the subjectivities out of the conversation is what it's all about. So I think maybe it's a pitch for our next piece of research. So maybe tenancy services can give us some more data that we can sort of drill down.
Maybe we should ask tenancy services, and see what we can do there. All right. Well, great. Lovely. It's been great talking to you. First one of the year. Sorry, we had a little bit of the glitch in between. Hopefully that didn't disturb too many people. But this will be edited and be put together. People will be able to watch it, listen to it only when you go for your morning walk and whatever. And we'll do more of these. And for all our landlords and people who, well, anybody who joins in and watches this, it'd be great to get your feedback on the type of research that you'd like Graham to do as well. He's a great resource that we have. So if you've got any suggestions of information, topics that you'd like to see us research at Property Brokers, along with the property knowledge with Professor Graham Squires, just get hold of us. Graham, what's the best way that people can get hold of you if they want to get hold of you?
Yeah, if you just Google the property knowledge, you'll find your way to my website and just, drop me an email. No problem at all.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. Enjoy your evening in the Garden City. And
we've still got some light out there, which is good.
We've still got some. I wouldn't have a clue what we've got out here because I'm in a little media room. But thanks a lot, Graham. And thanks for everybody for tuning in. And any questions, you can email me, david.faulkner@pb.co.nz. It's always great to get your feedback. And thanks for watching.